Welcome to the OCOM podcast, Modern Medical Education. My name is Dr. Robert Hasty. I am the Dean and the Chief Academic Officer of OCOM. And today we're going to do another episode on AI, but this one from a student perspective. And joining us today is student Dr. Lidia Ojonsky, an incredible medical student leader and a well-loved medical student here at OCOM. Welcome to the show, student Dr. Ojonsky. Yeah.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Hasty. Very excited to be here.
Awesome. Excellent. So we're talking today about the much hyped AI in medical education. It seems like the topic du jour every single day, right? Yeah.
Definitely a monster of a topic, and I would say on everybody's mind right now of where to move forward and kind of how to use and incorporate AI. So it's definitely a hot topic right now.
Yeah. Somebody was saying, we talk way too much about AI. Almost every meeting I'm talking about AI, but it kind of reminds me 30 years ago when the internet first came out that it was being hyped and we talked about the internet all the time. But you know what? It was worth it because the internet's changed everything, right? And I swear AI is going to change everything too.
Yeah, I mean, when you think 20 years ago and you think the development of the internet and everything like that, everything went from, having to search it up, having to go do it yourself to at the tip of your, at the fingertips and just searching it and instantly getting it. And now it's becoming easier and easier with AI as time goes on. It's just, the internet's almost become too much volume and there's too much of the internet. And now the AI is kind of helping, digest that material a little more and really capture it. So.
Yeah, and I'm also convinced that the quality of the internet has actually changed medical education. I think that medical students today come out, with more information, more knowledge, can learn things in a much quicker fashion than they did 30 years ago. Now, of course, the same thing is true with the patients too, right? But and I think both of those are a positive, happenstance. And I'm actually like super inspired how AI is going to change medical education, and how it's already changing medical education, and it's probably changed even since you started last year. Yeah.
For sure. AI is getting more and more advanced. I think ChatGPT just came out with their GPT-5, so everything is just getting more and more advanced as time continues to go on. And it's definitely something that's super exciting, and I think we're going to continue to see it improve and just make everything easier. But as for medical education, I started about a year ago, and I was like very hesitant to use AI at first. I was like, oh, is this something that is kind of safe to use? Is it something that's going to give me the correct answers? But the more and more you kind of incorporate it into your studies, you realize that it really is just a helpful assistant, and it really is just something that can help you with even the most basic or complicated questions.
Yeah. Now let me ask you this. I want to hear about, because I know that you and your colleagues here at OCOM are using AI every single day. We were at AI First, AI Day #1 of OCOM, available to every student, every faculty, and every staff member. But how are you guys using it? How do you see it used, yourself and your colleagues, throughout OCOM?
So there's a lot of different ways that people are using it. First and foremost is note-taking. So, the mass amount of literature that we have to go through as a medical student is something that you can't avoid. No matter where you go, no matter what school institution you go to, you have to read the primary resource. You have to go through it. But the next step comes note taking. How do you digest that information? How do you use it to the best of your ability so that you can do well on an exam? And that's where I think a lot of people are using AI, whether it's to explain excerpts of a textbook or whether it's to actually create notes based on objectives. And you can give it 20, 30 objectives and say, hey, can you make me high yield board style notes for these questions, and it'll give you pages and pages and pages of documents. You can have it shorten it, lengthen it, adapt however you want. And then there's the whole other side of it, which is you have the note taking. Now, can you quiz me? Can you make questions? Can you make one-liners, different things like this? Where can you assess me on what it is I'm reading? There's even students that use it for active reading. So as they're reading something, they'll ask it to make notes, and then as soon as they're done with that section, they'll say, hey, can you give me 5 questions based on what I just read that are completely different from one another? And then that way you're just kind of solidifying information as you're taking it in. So there's so many ways, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of what students are actually using it for, but it's something that's become a powerful and just amazing tool.
Incredible. Yeah, incredible. I think it's going to transform the way we learn, right? For years, I taught medical school faculty, the typical format, you want to know what, you have a course description, then you have sessions, you develop the sessions, based upon those. For each of the sessions that you have objectives, and then you build the content, and then you create the questions, right? That's the typical process for a faculty member at a medical school developing a course for the most part. And, and of course, it would be great if every medical student had the opportunity to have, 5 or 10 board style questions, as a learning tool for every single objective. And now that's super simple and super possible, right?
Yeah, and it goes back into the fact of, like, as you said before, the faculty member has to, sit there and make a unique question, make a board style question, but those questions should really be used for that examination in the end. But you're completely right. The faculty member can, ask the AI to make it those questions, and the faculty member can adjust and then, transform those questions to fit how they want them to look. But everything is about the prompt that you give, I've noticed. So the quality of the prompt is super important. And if the quality of the prompt is good and you really take your time to explain what you want to the chatbot, it can do marvelous things. And it can do exactly that. It can make for every single objective or every single topic. It can make you 5, 10, 20 questions. So
yeah, incredible. One of the, one of my colleagues, I talk to, frequently, and, and of course they're obsessed about, reading for medical students and assigning reading. And reading is in some ways very passive. You almost have to, interpret, apply the information for it to actually make a difference in your ultimate learning. And to me, that's what AI can do, right? It transforms the information to go there. And, some of the arguments, oh, well, the students, medical students have to read, as a physician, that's how we read. But we actually read more as human beings than ever in the history of humankind, right? There's been tons of evidence, and think about all the emails, the text messages, the internet websites, and all those different things that we read all the time, right? So we're always reading as humans, right? And so I think being able to interpret stuff from reading, I mean, that's a basic skill that kids in elementary school have. But I think how people are learning nowadays is through different ways, multimedia, being asked questions, active learning. I think people are seeking more active learning tools than ever before. And that's what actually inspires me for AI, because it can actually give you those active learning tools with immediacy.
Yeah, and I think it even goes further than that. So, I always read the textbooks in the sense of you have to have that primary source, 1000%. But I think this even goes into the analogy of, medical school is like drinking from a fire hose. I really think AI has kind of gapped that. I really think it's made it less of a fire hose, less of a, maybe a fire hydrant, as some people say. It really is turning into something that you can digest and adapt to. So, before, the reason why you have that analogy is because you have pages and pages and pages and chapters of textbooks that, you have to read. It's something you have to do. But now, instead of reading the same thing 3 or 4 times to try to understand what's going on, you can get a good pass through and then use things like AI and different assistants and different online resources now to break this material down and have it more, not just more digestible, but more understandable. And you can, as a student, use different resources to kind of just gather it all in, absorb it all, and then you can perform well on test day. So, yeah.
And more efficient learning, too. I had an interesting conversation with the CEO of the NBOME a number of years ago, and he said that, on similar tests, that what he was seeing was that students were actually performing better. And, and I think some of that may be related to the fact that we're doing a better job in medical education in terms of more active learning and, a lot more case-based learning and, not just passive lectures and stuff in the old days. But I also think that, I think the internet technologies played a role in this. But I'm also like super excited because I think people are going to learn better than ever before using these tools, and I think we're going to have smarter docs in the future. I think folks are going to be able to get to the heart of the matter on things they're studying. More efficient learning, like you're saying, right? It's reading the same material 3 or 4 times is less efficient than applying the information in a very, intentional method, I think, yeah.
No, for sure. And then it even goes into the fact of, what is the future of, AI? What is the future of medicine? And it's, as you're saying, it's understanding how to use it, but then furthermore, being able to use it. Because, AI it's not going to go away. Just like how the internet came, AI is here now. We have to adapt to it. We have to use it. But even further, even about the clinical reasoning and figuring out which one is the best to use and which one you like. Because every chatbot is different, and a little, tweak, each chatbot has its own kind of variety and style. It's better at some critical thinking than others. One example is research I actually did with my sister about, clinical reasoning using AI. And we use the most popular chatbots, ChatGPT, Cloud, Gemini, Meta AI, and we gave it USMLE style questions and said, what do you think the differential diagnosis is? It wasn't a multiple choice question, just what do you think? And we found that different chatbots were able to critically think and answer better than others. So these are tools that we're not just going to use as medical students, but it's important for us to understand how they work now, because you're going to have patients that, come in and they're going to go, oh, well, the AI told me I have XYZ. And it's up to you to be able to differentiate and go, well, is that a fair assessment? And maybe you're using AI yourself to critically think yourself and go, okay, well, why is it not this? And then you're able to understand and interpret that information as a physician. So I think it's extremely important.
Right. And remind me, I know you told me this before, but if I recall, I think you said Claude was number 1 in your study.
Claude was number 1.
Gemini was number 2, right?
Gemini was number 2. Yeah. Gemini still got 0 wrong, though. The only thing with Gemini was because we asked it essentially to give us a list of differential diagnoses and one final diagnosis. So Claude gave the correct final diagnosis every time. Gemini gave the correct diagnosis in the list of differentials every time. But I believe there was 1 or 2 times where the final diagnosis, it was very close, but not exactly there.
Wow. Yeah. And of course, I love that study, because you could probably replicate that study every year, because, every time there's a new version and stuff that comes out. And we should probably promote that study a little bit more, because, I think that's, remarkable, right? I mean, I think that, folks across the country could really use that and adapt it immediately. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing, and we're actually working on another one right now where we're trying to kind of expand it, because we only did 10 questions. We kept it super small scale. And now we're actually going to apply it with COMLEX style questions to see, is there a difference? Can it adapt to the osteopathic model differently than an allopathic, just, basic questions? So it's really going to be interesting to see how it levels up, how they all level up to each other, especially with new versions coming out every day, as you said. Because we tried to stick with the free models, but there's free models, paid for versions. There's so many different avenues that you could go down.
Yeah, and of course, ChatGPT is probably the most popular. That's the one my mom uses, right?
Yeah.
She's 83 years old, so which is great, right? It is a very popular, and it does a good job. But if I recall, that was the worst.
It was pretty. Yeah, it was actually the worst one was actually Meta AI, but they were still pretty comparable to each other. Yeah, it was definitely something that. It was those AI hallucinations, as people say, where it'll give you that diagnosis that's completely wrong, but it'll convince you that it's correct, in the sense of, even as a medical student, me reading it, I'm like, it makes a good point, but that's not in the question stem, or that wasn't in the clinical vignette. So it'll make you think, it'll take you down a road that's not really there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and listening to some how folks are using it and stuff, and how I'm actually using it, I've been recently obsessed with Notebook LM, which is another Google product, right? And I freaking love that. I mean, I think it's pretty amazing, and I know that a lot of your colleagues are starting to use it. And when you talk about different learning modalities, right? You can actually turn any textbook chapter into a podcast, right? You can turn any written material into a podcast with 2 people speaking just like they are now, and really, I think in a very insightful way, comparing and contrasting all those other things that you want to do with material to take your learning to the higher level. And so I know that people are doing that. I know that people are doing other types of learning modalities through AI. So I don't know if that's what you're saying too. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, Notebook LM is an amazing resource. I'm seeing more and more students here use it every day, and it's exactly what you said. You can just upload text, and it does even the podcast feature is phenomenal. I don't know how it does it, but even just basic study guides. You can just click. There's a study guide button. You just click it, and it'll create an entire summary of what you just read, and it'll say this is what I think is important, and it's spot on almost every time. So it's just become, again, it's just different resources of how to consolidate information to make it less like that, fire hose analogy. It's like we can, if you have, they say as you get through your medical education, you learn to have more effective studying. And I think this is a part of that, where, instead of studying 12 hours a day of, 1 chapter or 2 chapters, you can take that 12 hours and you can cover an entire module of information. So, yeah.
Yeah, and another one of my fascinations in the world is the learning style myth, right? So you hear from a lot of people, yeah, and people will just say, and I hear this from academics too. Oh, well, my learning style is auditory. My learning style is visual reading or visual images and stuff like that. But and of course this data goes back to the 1950s. It's called the learning style myth. So, but people keep perpetuating that. People think that they have to learn in a way that's best for them. But the evidence actually shows the more different modalities that you learn, the better you learn the material. So if you do hear it from, say, a podcast or some, auditory thing, or if you see it written or maybe even haptic learning, the more different modalities, the better the long-term learning. And again, that's what fascinates me with the AI, that has the ability to put things in different modalities.
Yeah, and I think it's very important, and you're completely correct. The more ways you see something and the more ways that it can be broken down, the better you're going to absorb it and the better you're going to be able to apply it later on. And honestly, that's also what I love about AI. If I'm asking it a question, it'll always ask me follow-up questions. Would you like me to put this in a diagram for you? Would you like me to make you a flow chart or a graphic that I can design really quickly? And, yeah, go for it. And it'll make you something that is, again, extremely quick, but not only that, is extremely helpful because it's always accurate. I shouldn't say always accurate, but most of the time accurate, but at least accurate to what the prompt is that you gave it. And it's really fascinating to see, and it really encompasses all the different learning styles, because in there you can get the visual, you can get the auditory, you can get the tactile, in the sense of you're typing and asking it to do things yourself, and you're critically thinking as you're using the AI.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I'm also interested is, listening to our second year students, because they're getting ready for the licensure exams, the quote unquote boards, for the first time in their career, right? Level one for the Comlex USA is their first, level of the boards. And I always tell medical students, especially second year, you're going to look back and you wish you would have studied every single day of medical school during the second year for those boards. And I've had so many people come back to me and they said, yeah, you were right. That was actually true and factual. I think, the opportunity to be able to use AI to study for the boards is also pretty remarkable. So, what are you seeing and hearing out there amongst your colleagues?
So no, I mean, AI use for the boards is definitely something that's, up and coming, and it's something that's widely disseminated amongst the class. One thing that actually me and Kenny are working on, so we're working on incorporating AI and making it on that larger scale so that we can share it with students of board prep resources. So something we're doing right now, it's actually a proposal that's going to be presented today, is using AI to match up with the OMS ones. So the concept is, we have to go back through that information anyway for our board prep. So why not kind of hit two birds with one stone? If the OMS ones are learning, let's say, infectious disease next month, why can't we go week by week with them, make high yield board prep for the twos, but then almost also make sort of study guides and learning materials for the OMS ones? So that way it's kind of a full circle moment where you're helping the lower classmen, but then you're also helping the upperclassmen by gearing up and getting ready for those boards, and little things that'll help along the way.
I love it, right? And that, to me, that's classic. What we call sometimes spiral curriculum. Where you're actually going back and hitting that information again from the first year, and of course the collaborative and collegial nature of that. I mean, it's pretty incredible. Yeah. I had a meeting actually this week with the faculty organization leadership. So each month I meet with the faculty organization leadership. Here we call what we call the faculty organization, sometimes called the faculty senate most places. But here it's inclusive of the entire faculty. So it's not really a senate, it's really every single member of the faculty. And they're awesome. I love our faculty here. They're incredible. And of course, they really care about the students. See, I've never seen a faculty more caring about students than our faculty is. But one of the ideas that they actually had was, maybe, in the old days, we had this thing called the note service, where the medical students would, from a peer perspective, take notes of every single lecture back in the day, right? And of course, people sit through lectures and you had to take the information and try to make it, and then so you would have folks curate that. And then a lot of medical schools, the medical students actually had their own copy machine, and that they would actually make the copies, and then the next day you would have all the written notes from what you learned the day before, and that, of course, that went away with learning management systems, LMSs, that immediately all the all the material was printed. Of course, with our system, we don't really have lectures per se, right? It's more active learning and flipped classroom type of stuff. So there isn't really a need for that there. But why not have more of an AI, which it sounds like what you're thinking about doing for the first years, but why not have a curated AI system where that you are putting together all those resources, because so many people are making awesome resources, like just the fact that so many people every course, they're making all these test questions that might be helpful. They're making all the, the podcasts and everything that may be helpful, curating that information in an AI way, or, flow diagrams like you were talking about. Why not curate that? So it really is remarkable. And, of course, what we're doing here, I think, is really, light years ahead of what I hear, other medical schools are doing, which is pretty incredible. It speaks a lot for the the culture, the collaboration, the collegiality of your class. So I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal that the faculty organization, the faculty bring that up, because as you said, we love every single faculty member here. Everybody's so supportive, but it's just phenomenal that you have that perspective from a faculty standpoint, in the sense that encouraging that collegiality and encouraging that family amongst the students, not just oh well, you're upperclassmen and lowerclassmen, but how can you help each other? How can you break down and realize you were once in their shoes and they're going to be in your shoes? So how can you better prepare everyone for the same task that we're all undergoing?
Yeah. Well said. And and our mission here is to train caring and competent physicians, right? How do you do that? How can you create a caring physician without caring for them? And I love that about OCOM, because faculty staff, it's the most caring faculty staff I've ever seen. When you walk around, and I've walked around a lot of medical schools in America, and it just it hits different, as my 15-year-old daughter would say, right?
For sure.
So anyway, awesome. Yeah. So what do you think are the drawbacks, going through this age of AI in medical school? Yeah.
So I think the primary, because I'm plugged into all the different social medias and things online. I think the biggest thing right now is, are you learning less because you're using AI? Are you getting sort of a AI degree, as some say, or a just a degree in the sense of that you're not going through all the information that maybe your predecessor went before you, where they didn't have access to this information? But I think I don't see it that way. I see it more as a tool and an assistant. At the end of the day, if you go through the material, whether it was when you had a physical copy of the textbook, or whether it's now that you have a PDF of the textbook online, or whether you use online resources that are being created every day, or you use AI, such as most of us are doing here, you are using it as a resource and as a surplus to that primary resource and to that first learning style that you're going to be doing. So at the end of the day, my caveat to that is some people say, oh well, AI is going to cause physicians and in general people to critically think less, to have less critical thinking, because they're not going to be able to perform. They're going to be reliant on, oh well, let me ask my AI. But I don't see it that way. I see it that if you're able to understand and digest what the AI is telling you, the information is still there. You're still learning everything that you need to learn. You're still passing all your examinations. There's no AI in your exam. You're sitting in there and you're in that exam hall taking it yourself. Same thing when it's going to come to board. Same things when you're going to have your patients in front of you. You're going to have to react and you're going to have to answer. So, I don't see it as a drawback. I see it definitely as something that can help improve learning for all medical students.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like whenever there's new technology, sometimes there's that healthy dose of skepticism, which I agree with the healthy dose of skepticism, but there also seems to be like a severe dose of skepticism sometimes, which I think it goes back to the status quo bias. People have such an innate status quo bias. So whatever they did before, whatever the way they learn, and I see this all the time with faculty and administrators, well, my medical school did this way, or the last medical school I taught at did this way, and it has to be that way. And that's not true. I think, things evolve, right? If, we were just talking with Edwin, our AV engineer before, and, he said, if you're not growing, you're dying, right? And I think that's absolutely true, right? If you were doing something that was excellent 5 or 10 years ago, it may not be excellent anymore, and you have to, move with the times, right? And use whatever, resources and skills that you have, right? If you were, grew up in the 1880s and you were like, oh, well, the buggy whip is the way to go, right? In 1920, pretty tough, to, only use a horse and buggy around to get where you want to go, right? I mean, so, the technology, grows and adapts, and I think as humans, and it's also fun, right? It's also fun to do new things, right? And I think that's the opportunity of, the technology and, what we have ahead. I mean, I am like so excited. My life is better than ever, and technology's played an important role in it over the time. I don't want to go back pre-internet and stuff. Yeah.
And even to go back what you were just saying about, staying with the times, and that's what we're seeing every year. Medical education is becoming more and more competitive. Residency is becoming more and more competitive. If you look at board scores every year, they're going higher and higher. The number of research publications are going higher and higher. Everything is increasing. And when you take a step back and look at it, you have to look at what resources are being used. And you can attribute AI and just, again, the continuous growth of the internet and technology to this continuous upward trend. And, as a class, as students at OCOM, we're not only trying to stay with that trend, but we're trying to, rise above it. And we're trying to be right at that tip of everything new that's coming out because we want to perform the best that we can. So,
Yeah. And you guys are truly leading, right? There was a national conference on AI here last year. We actually had OCOM students the first year of OCOM as panelists at a national conference on AI. It's just remarkable, and I give kudos to you and the whole class and both classes, for all the leadership and really moving things forward. We're incredibly blessed to have such an amazing cohort of medical students. So anyway, so what do you think from your perspective? Because you're immersed in this all day, every day. Talking with your colleagues all the time and stuff like that. What do you see as the future of AI technology, and how's that going to impact the physician of the future?
So I see AI moving in a completely forward direction and being incorporated more and more into medical education. The best example is even the clinical simulation department in the sense of we have our standardized patients, and we are currently seeing a patient, and we're currently going through that. But then, our SOAP notes are they're helping the facilitators by formatively grading them with AI. But I think you're going to see, as AI continues to advance more and more, you're able to talk to your AI now. You're able to have full conversations. You have Notebook LM who's making podcasts. I think it's going to eventually turn into a thing where you, as a medical student, are using clinical reasoning, and you're using the skills that you're learning, and you can use it in an AI model. Even the simulation mannequins that we have, I foresee in the future them being linked with something like AI, and I foresee that AI just being incorporated more and more into what we're learning. Even case-based learning, you can incorporate AI into every avenue just because of its widespread use, but also just its creativity and its ability to just think on the spot and create new cases, unique cases, and just really allow the student to fully immerse themselves in education and medicine, but also critically think as to what it is that they're actually looking at.
Yeah, it's going to be incredible. Actually, our president, Chairman Tujak, he's actually created an AI engine that does a case-based learning scenario. So it's he demoed it very recently for a small group of us, and it's pretty remarkable. You're interacting with the case just like you would with the patient, like you said, and to be able to go through on a case-based learning, obviously, you could probably model it for a patient encounter, but this is designed for case-based learning, and then to interact in a way, and then and of course the IT team says let's combine that into an Apple Vision Pro, where you could actually do this with learners around the world. So just like how here we have 8 students to 1 physician faculty members, in a room where you're looking at EKGs and chest X-rays, with the technology, you could literally be in an environment with other learners talking through the case with the AI thing. Also, be able to get evidence-based, backup support. What's the evidence behind that in real time? So you're having that immediate feedback on what you're learning. And I think we're just scratching the surface. You mentioned the SOAP notes and things like that. To me, I think being able to go through a patient encounter without having to put your head in some keyboard somewhere and and have the patient see the back of your head while you're taking notes on the keyboard, but to actually have the AI enhance the patient experience where it's taking the notes. And of course, from evidence-based perspective, it's, doing the evidence-based suggestions to the physician afterwards or during the encounter on, treatments, differential diagnoses and those type of things. It has the opportunity to really expand medicine and, of course, grow new opportunities for physicians, right? Every hospital system I know now has a chief of AI, a job that wasn't invented 3 years ago. When, because I think it's been almost 3 years in November of 22, I think when ChatGPT was first released, there was no one ever had a chief of AI. Now every hospital system has a chief of AI. Our team here is thinking about doing a certificate in AI, which they're starting to grow up. But we have I think some unique ideas on how we could really do it. OCOM quality and those type of things. And so I'm super excited about those type of things. Yeah, the SOAP notes themselves. The faculty are actually using AI to help grade. Now there's still a physician that oversees everything, but to help grade that and I'll tell you, I loaded in some old SOAP notes I used to grade. I still have my rubric and everything. The AI actually caught stuff that I missed when I was grading it, and to be able to grade SOAP notes better. And of course, it's one of the most tedious tasks of any faculty member at a medical school, and probably the thing I like the least as a faculty member is grading SOAP notes and, to use AI and those type of things. So, and of course, from simulation, they're talking about, with all the video AI simulators, you can literally have a case in a VR environment where you're actually interacting live time with the virtual patient. They're going through a cardiac arrest or something like that, and how you intervene and stuff like that. It's, the future is just incredible. I'm so excited.
Yeah. And even that, just to bring it again full circle, even that, CBL case, to be able to bring it to life is something that's, spectacular. Because it's like right now, the way that we do it, we have the facilitator, you have the case, and it's kind of a, stepwise manner. But what if it was able to be, as you said, not only have the AI break down things as you're going through the case to enhance that learning, but even different scenarios that can't really be mimicked, bringing the clinical aspect to even just a CBL case of having the AI be the patient and tell you what's wrong. Instead of you reading it on a screen, having it tell you what it came in for, why it's here, what symptoms it's presenting with. And it really allows you to look at things in a different way. And it, again, adapting a different learning style.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I just know that there's probably some physicians out there that have a lot of concern. Actually, I have a blog coming out here in a couple weeks about the sky's falling type of thing. They're not going to need physicians in the future and stuff. And this is one of those things that we've heard since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Technology is going to replace me. But what we've learned is that the more technology that comes in, actually it creates better jobs, higher paying jobs, more interesting jobs than those traditional jobs. But it also decreases unemployment and all those other things. Now, granted, what you were doing before may change. In fact, you may have to adapt, just like if you were the buggy whip salesperson in the 1800s, when the car came along, you might want to get in the automobile industry, right? And also with physicians too, But, I was talking to a cardiologist who's on our board the other day, and and we're, he's hearing the same thing I am. People are saying, "Oh, AI may displace physicians," but I think it's opposite. It was 1979. The EKG reads first came out. So, for people that, aren't familiar listening to this, EKG reads are the things on the top of the EKG that actually, suggest what's the diagnosis, right? And that was 1979. I was 6 years old when that first came out. And if anything, it actually increased the business and the work and everything for physicians, but it also, in many ways, actually has saved people's lives. So you have, maybe people that, medical assistants or whatever that, weren't versed on these things. I'll never forget, I saved a person's life because the medical assistant, read the tombstone elevations on the EKG and, acute MI and all this other stuff, ran and got me. And I wasn't even supposed to be there. And, I was able to save a life because of an automated reading technology since 1979. So again, I think, I think we should look at this, open-minded and how is this going to help us with our careers and opportunities?
Yeah, for sure. I think as long as you stay, you hop on the buggy and you keep going, I think the opportunities are endless.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this was a awesome, time to spend some time with you. Lydia, I'm so impressed with you and your colleagues, and I love this conversation. And I could probably just go on all day. But anyway, with that being said, let's go ahead and call it to a close. Any last comments?
Not anything particular. Just I'm super excited for the future of AI. Super excited for everything to see how it's even going to adapt not only medical education but even just things here at OCOM just at a local level. So super excited to see the future and everything of how it's going to transform. So
Excellent. Well, thanks again, and thanks for being on another podcast of OCOM, the Modern Medical Education podcast of OCOM. With that, that brings us to another episode. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next episode.